two of them connect with Rentari just at the very end, managed to keep him alive. A lot of healing and support needed from Igloo, and he does proc his Bwonsamdi trinket, so a bit of sloppiness, unfortunately, at the end costs that cheat death cooldown to proc for the next 6 minutes now. I mean, you were just saying how dangerous those are, and they were. They did really well with the first hit. They Typhoon comboed into an Ursul's Vortex to deal with the first round of 3, but after that, just too many went off.
Yeah, but, you know, I mean, I think I'd take a cheat death over a death in this dungeon any day, just even though he doesn't have it available for 6 minutes. That's why you wear the trinket. That's perfect there. Now, they do have the exact right amount of trash percentage in order to, like you mentioned, pull that trash back into the boss. But looking at Azarok here, these Earth Ragers are probably one of the more dangerous mechanics, and they actually got one of the worst fixate configurations they possibly could for this boss.
Yeah, I mean, indeed, and Earth Rage is just very dangerous in this comp as well. They fixate a random player. You can't get double fixated. You see just how bad the bleed is on Lofus right now. 6 stacks, opting to just get away from it. Now, when one of these Earth Ragers gets enraged, essentially, and grows bright blue and grows in size, it will take a substantial amount of increased damage, but also deal increased damage. So very important for players to get away from that while the supporting rest of the party cleaves that down. Lizelle just now getting healed back above that 4 stack of Grievous, and now we're in kind of essentially, Zyro, snooze fest on this boss.
Yeah, once those Earth Ragers go down, especially in this Grievous affix, that extra bleed damage, which will proc the Grievous damage, making even more bleed damage, that just proves how dangerous that section of the fight is. We saw them all getting incredibly low. But like you mentioned, once those Earth Ragers are dead, you kind of just patchwork the boss down. He'll spawn one Earth Rager every now and then, but just that one fixate, that one player will just have to run around in circles while his teammates cleave it down. There's not much going on. Typically what we'll see from these teams is once they've dealt with this one Earth Rager, they'll then pull the Taskmaster in and cleave everything down.
Yeah, that's the kind of efficiency you look for from the teams here. I mean, this one Earth Rager, you can kind of see Wolf run around in circles, wanting to not get too many stacks on him, while the rest of the team supports with things like Typhoon, Leg Sweep, whatever they can to kind of keep the mob away, but allow Wolf to still effectively DPS the boss. Soon enough, we're going to be seeing that trash pull likely come out of 40k to sync the boss's death along with proccing their 5th Reaping Wave, so they can make a coordinated run down to the 3rd boss's room, Rixa Flux Flame. We'll see how that turns out for them. Not far behind at this point, though. Abrakeydabra now at 60% on Azarok has also entered that kind of second, you know, more mellow phase, waiting to pull their trash too. They're only 2% ahead on trash, but it looks like they'll be doing some similar pulls here.
Yeah, and that 2% ahead on trash doesn't really do much for them, because if I'm not mistaken, this whole Taskmaster thing we first saw from their team, and we know that gives about 7% trash, so they're a little bit not perfect on their calculation for trash percentage, but that didn't seem to affect them too much. They are catching up just a little bit on that boss percentage. We saw they were 30% behind before. Now they're about 25% behind as 40k starts to focus more on cleaving this trash down. So we'll have to see which one of these teams can sort of cleave this more efficiently down and get the skip relatively clean.
But as promised, I will mention it again, there are 6 deaths on the board in favor of 40k, so 30 seconds extra that Abrakeydabra will need to overcome, not to mention they're already slightly behind on the dungeon. 40k quite masterfully dealing with the rest of the trash on top of Azarok here, 98% on the board. Azarok will fall just as the Taskmaster Ascari is about to be killed here. They'll take their little minecart ride down to the R&D wing that Jack ever so lovingly mentions every time, and they will get ready to shadow meld that aggro off. Everybody down, actually they're not going in the cart. They use the momentary time out of combat when proccing Reaping to mount up, and they opt to just go down the side of the cliff there instead of using the cart.
Yeah, that's actually a completely interesting route. I don't think we've seen anyone do that on broadcast before. Instead of taking the cart path, they opt to just go completely around that minefield, and nobody gets hit by a bomb. That's very impressive. I don't think we've seen that from anyone before. But like we mentioned, they're going to go to the far end of this boss room. They're going to proc their Shadow Meld, which will skip all of the R&D trash that they pulled, and they'll only have to deal with just that one Risen Soul that leaked through.
Yeah, so I mean, their aggro radius is just so big, and at this point, they just succumb to the fact that we got to kill this Risen Soul. We're not getting away from it. Not too much damage. A couple of Lost Souls leak as well, but not going to deter them from starting on the boss. Rixa Flux Flame on Tyrannical. Very, very dangerous boss in terms of damage output. Mechanically pretty sound. She will drop these kind of Azurite goop puddles on the ground at a player's location, and after she drops 2, she will start her propellant blast in the direction of one of the players. You want to make sure you aim that blast towards the pool so they can clean off the platform. But Zyro, first of all, she casts Pure Fire damage at the tank, not blockable, just huge amounts of incoming damage. Want to get those Ignore Pain spam as often as possible, but she also has the Chemical Burns.
Yeah, the Chemical Burn is obviously like the more dangerous section of the fight here. She'll target both the tank and the closest player to the boss with this nasty, once again, fire damage debuff that will deal a lot of damage. You can see how much damage it's ticking on the player's damage that goes on here every single time it goes out. And they don't really have that. They have a pretty solid DPS comp for it. Their Monk can touch a Karma, their DK can use their AMS, and should it go on the Rogue like it does here, he can just cloak it off, use that magic immunity, so we did instantly see it go away on the side of Wolf Disco. They have a pretty solid comp for dealing with that debuff.
Abrakeydabra doing well to get through the minefield there, as well as they get down into Rixa Flame's room, drop their aggro on their respective 5th Reaping Wave, and just get to town on her. 40k, of course, well ahead at this point, about 30% extra health down from them, 50% now for Rixa. And yeah, well, as you mentioned, Zara, they have enough defensive tools rotational here so that the 2 closest members to Rixa are either a tank dealing with it, with either Spell Reflect or just, well, their tankiness, or of course a rotation of Anti-Magic Shell. You have Cloak of Shadows from the Rogue, a lot that can be helped out for the healer, because we saw Lizelle get it at the beginning of the fight, and one of those takes is about 25% of your max health.
Right, and we the monks can also remove it with diffuse magic, so they just have a ton of tools to remove or deal with that damage. And as well as, you know, you just see the massive damage from the Windwalker Monk. A lot of that has to deal with a touch of Karma. They just get a free several 100,000 worth of damage for free from that. So, I mean, we see them actually pretty masterfully dealing with this area of denial, which is, of course, the main portion of the boss fight, making sure they don't run out of room to walk around and making sure they're blasting all of those extra goop holes off of the platform.
Now, it's important to note right now that we're at 4:15 left on Bloodlust for 40k. If they get it back up, it'll be pretty late into the final boss fight with Razgo, but I'm not sure. They'll either get it at the last phase or maybe even in the transition phase, but that's quite a ways off. The boss is about to fall here, and so a bit of advantage here for Abrakeydabra as they only have 64 seconds left on theirs, so they'll kind of have the option and luxury to use that whenever they want. Nonetheless, 40k has downed the 3rd boss, Rixa, and will be getting ready to stealth through the rest of this trash, which they won't pull at all, and if they do, well, they have to pull some. There's some True Sight in there. They will just get ready to Shadow Meld it at the end.
Yeah, of course, we'll just see a pretty typical Shroud up to the final pack. We see that boss surrounded by some of those the little jetpack goblins. I don't know what they're called off the top of my head, but those do have True Sight, like you mentioned. They'll have to use their Shadow Meld to get past that trash. And I mean, we've gone over this Bloodlust timing a lot of times before. I can't remember how many times we've said, oh, they might not get their Bloodlust up, but I think every single time we've mentioned that, it's come up like in the last 30 or 40% of the boss, so it's probably going to come up for them right at the end of the fight, but we'll just have to see.
Mogul Razdunk about to be pulled here by 40k as they well dodge the little jetpack goblin dudes, as deemed here by is ironic. Now, you know, I always say this is more of a 3x3 grid, but really, Jack pointed out to me, it's more of a 3x2 grid, certainly wider than it is tall, so they have to make sure with those Boomba bots going on the side that will cover one column and row of said grid, as we see here, that the team effectively moves it to a spot and they have where you can rotate around the boss because of his large hitbox and not have to move the boss too frequently. Now, if you mismanage the pull or mismanage the positioning, you do have to get ready to pre-move the boss well ahead of time, because it is a very, very stubborn boss, often cast. So if you don't get in position ahead of time by paying attention to where those Boomba bots go out, it will get you in trouble.
Yeah, and of course, the more dangerous parts of the fight is what we just saw right there. We see Igloo going down to it. That Gatling gun where you have to move around the boss. You have to dodge the Gatling gun. But then there's also those bombs going off at the same time, and we saw him go down to that exact combo there. Fortunately, they are running with an Unholy DK who's able to battle res him up quickly. Now, in that double Rogue Windwalker Monk comp, you can't do that. So, good on them there for having that comp in this dungeon. It would have been pretty unfortunate if they didn't have a battle res
that would have been disastrous. That would have been pretty much the end of their dungeon run right there. Now, we have to mention as well the homing missile, which oftentimes will go out on a ranged target. In this case, really the only target that's viable will be that Resto Druid. They have to run that homing missile out as anybody that is within that orange radius when it explodes will incur a pretty heavy dot. So something the healer doesn't want to have to deal with whilst all the other damage and a pretty heavy melee damage coming in on the tank goes out. 50% here for Mogul as it starts to enter his transition phase. During this transition phase, we do see often teams pop their Bloodlust. They don't have this available to them, but yet they have to deal with 2 of these Goblin Jetpack dudes.
Yep, the 2 Goblin Jetpack dudes. You know, in my defense, nobody pulls this trash in the dungeon, so I don't really remember what the names are.
It is part of this boss, just
True, it is part of this boss. These Sky Scorchers do have an interesting ability, this Azerite Heartseeker, where they'll target a player, and you can soak this damage by splitting damage by standing inside that red line. Of course, the main mechanic we're looking for in this intermission is that Stomp, that Drill Smash. He'll target one of the players. You see the arrow over their head right there on Igloo. And once the boss finishes the drill smash, guys, he'll go to that position, stomp down, and you want him to get him to stomp all 3 of these little oil cans. Once those oil cans are stomped, he goes back to the first phase.
Those are oil cans? I thought they were like little pillars or something. But nonetheless, of course, they've fixed that issue as well that we knew earlier with all of the pets down on the side. Those don't count anymore. So all 3 do need to be stomped before the boss is able to break out, who does so right now, 45%. Now, once you get past this transition, you're just back in phase 1 again. The exact same phase that we saw from 100 to 50. Bloodlust will be coming up in 32 seconds for 40K, whilst Abrakeydabra just clawing their way back, trying to get through this transition phase, and they still have their Bloodlust available as well. I like to see these teams, well, involuntarily on 40K's side, but holding on to their Bloodlust. A lot of the time, I don't feel like they need them during the transition, because they end up killing the Sky Scorcher so quickly and then just sitting there on a boss that is mostly immune to damage, doing nothing for 15 seconds of Bloodlust.
I mean, it's sort of a safety thing, right, with those 2 little goblin jetpack dudes. There's a lot of AoE damage going out on the group in addition to the AoE damage done by the drill smash that goes on the group. So it's just kind of a safety thing. They're making sure they're staying alive for the healing. But we do see the Bloodlust does come up for 40K when the boss is at 20% health. They'll probably have that up until the end of the fight. And of course, once the Mimiron's head sort of version of Mogul Resonant goes down, the Goblin himself will pop up and they'll just finish him off for the end of the dungeon.
Yeah, not a lot of health there as Mogul is being finished off by 40K here, and a rather turnaround performance here from 40K as they Raz dunk all over Abrakeydabra with a 2-0 sweep, even having to replay that first dungeon, which they were definitely in line to win. So 40K dominates here and moves on in the lower bracket.
40K smashes Abrakeydabra, who really just did not look like the team that we've come to know them by at this point here. 40K, the 4th seed, beating the number 2 seed in this tournament. And 40K not only was number 4 seed at the start of this tournament, but they ended up in 7th, 8th place the last tournament that we saw them. So the growth that we've seen from them today has been absolutely phenomenal, and they are knocking out Abrakeydabra. And 40K moves on to go up against Method NA on this one, Sours.
Yeah, unfortunately, Abrakeydabra just got iced early in the dungeon. As Shine went down to that iced spritzer in the beginning, and when you die as a Death Knight, you see his damage has sort of only just begun to take off. All these mobs have so much health, and the entire team just ends up going down without the extra damage. This pool's perhaps a little bit overzealous out of Abrakeydabra. They couldn't quite handle the pressure, and they all kind of started falling over one at a time. And this is sort of the story of Abrakeydabra, of the previous dungeon as well as this dungeon, where they just couldn't quite handle it. But 40K looking cool, calm, and collected with their beautiful movement throughout the entire dungeon. Some big pulls, and look at this, 0 deaths up until this point. Flawless execution.
And really, what was going on with Abrakeydabra here is ironic. It seemed like they were a team that we had slated to be stacking up against Method NA, maybe being a pretty close competitor to Method EU, and right here they definitely didn't play like it.
Yeah, no, I mean, we kind of established the narrative the first cup, where they were this super successful team. They were super dominant. They only really made one mistake all tournament long, but maybe it was the jump to 19 that kind of threw them off. I can't really think of anything else because we've seen a completely different team from them this week.
At some points, it kind of seemed like they've lost a little bit of their healer polish, where they've been trying to mix in maybe a little bit more damage here, and then they can play too aggressively, and then they start wiping here, Sours. And what was the big moment here in that Motherload?
Oh, this is big aggressive, but it's working out for 40K. The huge Giga pull out of Rentari, where this is the kind of pull that in the past you really only see this kind of stuff happening with a Death Knight with Gorfine's Grasp. But the power of the Resto Druid, he's able to drop a Typhoon and a Vortex, and you see he knocks all those mobs back, and then the Druid is the Death Knight equivalent in this, stacks all these mobs up beautifully for Lophis, and it's the same thing that we saw a lot of teams doing in the Waycrest Manor, where there's good head on these DPS players to kind of hold off on their damage for a little bit, to let these mobs get stacked up so that they can get maximum efficiency on their cooldowns and kill all these mobs at once. As you saw, a lot of these rock lances start to get off when these mobs are at low health, but they pull it off.
Incredible performance that they did there, and as you're seeing here in the lower final, Method NA and 40K are vying in that lower final spot to get into the grand finals. Method NA really wants to get that rematch against Method EU on this one here, Sloot.
I mean, certainly they want to get back up, but not even just for this week in the series that they just dropped against Method EU, but also just payback for their first cup 2 weeks ago. So, but 40K, I mean, 40K to me is the Method NA of 2 weeks ago. Method NA starting a bit sloppy, maybe, and just coming to their own. And 40K, every dungeon they do just keeps polishing and polishing, and it's not going to be a cakewalk for Method NA at all right now.
It'll be interesting to see who's going to be taking it. If you want to vote in chat right now as who you think is going to win the next matchup, be sure to use hashtag 4K or hashtag MNA to place your vote going into this. 40K putting on an incredibly impressive performance against Abrakeydabra, who in turn just did not look like the same team as they were before. Next up is going to be the lower finals to see who is going to go up to the grand finals against Method EU. Don't go anywhere, guys. The Mythic Dungeon International will return right after this short break. Method NA is going to be squaring off against Fourty in this lower finals to see who moves on to play against Method EU here. I'm Jack, and joining me on the desk right now, we've got Zyronic, Nagura, and Tettles here. Going into this game, we got King's Rest to start, followed by Shrine, and then Freehold if we go to a game 3 here. King's Rest has been a dungeon, Zyronic, that has really had a mixed history for both teams.
Yeah, we've seen both of these teams in King's Rest already this weekend. Now, both of them lost their first matchup in King's Rest earlier on with Team 40K losing to Method EU in pretty dominant fashion, and then Team Poluka also dropping their first King's Rest. But we did, however, see 40K, not Method 40K just yet. We saw 40K come back and actually win their second match against Team Poluka a couple matches ago. Even though it wasn't necessarily clean as King's Rest, they showed that they can get through the dungeon relatively clean.
Yeah, and from that point, we also have to look at the Shrine. Shrine's not the dungeon. We've seen a lot of deaths on this weekend, in particular, Nagura, and I'm curious to see if anybody is going to start adopting some of the other strategies, especially with limited time so far. We saw an excellent run out of Method EU for Shrine. It's got to be interesting if they're kind of setting the bar for how teams are running that later on.
Yeah, so I do believe both 40K and Method NA played Shrine. They both lost their matches, unfortunately. They both had problems with initiates pulling something, just not messing up some of their skips. So they both teams did have problems here, but I do believe Method NA specifically played so much better today than yesterday, and they're just showing this clean play. They do, there's still problems at the very, very end of the dungeon, but just their strategies in general, their routes, if they don't mess up anything, I think they just have stellar strategies here.
It definitely stepped it up here, but that also raises the question, because we've seen incredible growth out of Method NA and 40K. Is this going to be enough, Tettles, do you think, for 40K to be able to take this, or do you think Method NA is itching for that rematch?
I definitely think that we're going to see the Method v Method rematch. I think Method NA is a significantly better team than 40K. We saw Method NA really put Method EU to the test earlier on in this previous series, or the series that we saw 2 matches ago. And then we did actually see 40K routing Abrakeydabra, which we think that Abrakeydabra is going to end up probably being about the third to 4th seed coming into the LAN. We think they're like above 40K normally coming into this, but we actually did see 40K doing pretty well. So it might end up being a little bit closer of a match, but I do expect Method NA to take it.
Yeah, I think at this point, Abrakeydabra was playing a lot lower than our expectations here, but I'm kind of curious if we're underrating 40K going into this matchup here, Zyronic.
Yeah, the thing to mention about 40K is they've played a lot this weekend, and they're kind of on a tear in this lower bracket. And I mean, they've already given themselves the clean, faraway 4 seed in points for that LAN, and they're just going to be looking to solidify that position even more. If they win this match, they'll keep going even further up in those point standings.
Yeah, 40K definitely having that focus and definitely seems to be improving over time. But Method NA has got the favor of Twitch chat right now at 67%. We're going to be starting up on Game 1 in King's Rest.
Yeah, so King's Rest, as we said, both of those teams did have a little bit of problems in this dungeon here, and again, it's just a 19 tyrannical dungeon, so there's lots of things that can go wrong. 40K specifically did have problems on the very first boss, where they lost a player without the battle rest available to them, so they did have to 4-man the boss, and it just cost them so much time.
Yeah, in addition to that, we did see Method NA. They ended up wiping to an explosive going off after Machimba there in that first pull after Machimba. So we need to be watching to see how they clean up. I think overall Method NA strategy for how they do King's Rest is a little bit better than 40K's with how they end up pulling the first little bit of this instance, but at the end of the day, King's Rest really just comes down to clean play.
Most definitely, and one thing we will see the difference in the teams here as well is at the very start of the room. We've seen, I think Method EU was the only team who pulled all 4 packs here at the very start. We see Method NA pulling 2 packs, and 40K, I believe, also 2 packs. Now we see the Tree of Life being popped here by Igloo and also the Bloodlust, while Method NA is still holding on to their Bloodlust, either using it later for the boss or using it later once they pull more trash on top.
Yeah, and on the side of Method NA, you actually see them chaining their first pull into that second pull, allowing for more efficient cleave, allowing for them to just be able to chain and pull quickly. So most of the time, if you're running a rogue, you don't want to be chaining packs, but these rogues are playing Outlaw, and they don't get a significant amount of damage just from their vanish or from getting in stealth outside of the pack. So being able to chain packs is not at a detriment for Method NA's damage.
Yeah, and we see them pretty much not pulling everything on top of each other, because mainly those Witch Doctors. The Witch Doctors, they constantly cast an ability on the tank, which if it's not interrupted, does a lot of nature damage. So you want your melees to interrupt as many of them as possible, and if some of them go through, you use your Spell Reflect or you use some big cooldowns. Now, on top of that, you also cast a Shadow Bolt Volley, which is very dangerous if you don't interrupt it, and then there's also Raging Affix, right? So if you have multiple casters plus champions rage at the same time and you can't dispel them, it can get very dangerous very fast.
Yeah, and after the champion
champions end up casting their Vigilant Defense, which you actually see on the side of Method NA right now. It looks like a shield. The champions also have a passive Enrage, which they'll end up enraging by themselves just normally, just as the mob normally does. You actually see it getting double rage. It should get soothed here quickly on the side of Method NA, as JB does soothe it right there in order to be able to cancel that enrage effects off the mob. We actually do see on the side of Method NA, they have been holding their Bloodlust. They're getting ready to pull Reap into the Golden Serpent, and it's a high likelihood that they end up pulling Reap into the Golden Serpent, popping Bloodlust there, ending up nuking down the Reaping and then doing the Golden Serpent with the Reap. And then on the side of 40K, you have seen the Golden Serpent being engaged by them. They're doing the exact same pull as Method NA, except they don't have Bloodlust for it.
Yeah, so 40K, of course, killing the trash a little bit faster than Method NA because they did have this Bloodlust usage on the trash. Now, other than that, Method NA should probably catch up on boss damage here because of their Bloodlust on the boss. Now, Reaping is a little bit difficult here on this boss fight because, you know, not only do you have this debuff to deal with that we see with on Igloo here right now and on Lighty on Method NA side that does a lot of single target damage, you also need the healers to just dodge those swirlers on the ground, dispel the tank, and so on. So this debuff does so much damage that if you use your globals for something different, like dodging or dispelling the tank, you might have somebody die. So definitely gotta watch out for the spit gold as it is on Wolf Disco for 40K right now.
Yeah, making sure that you also drop the spit gold near the previous animated golds is also very important. You actually do see JB on the side of Method NA electing to run mass entangling, rooting these animated golds away so that they don't end up having to deal with them. This is actually pretty good. I actually prefer this because you end up not having to swap to those animated golds ever. You have a little bit better space around the room. On the side of 40K, they end up having to deal with those blobs occasionally, and they end up having to make sure that they get stayed away using tools like Ring of Peace or Ursul's Vortex or something like that. But you do see the Golden Serpent actually has a rather large hitbox, especially for these animated golds that end up creeping closer towards them. So making sure that you do keep them at bay and keeping them far away from the Golden Serpent is imperative.
I'm not sure if I agree on liking the Master here because the Typhoon can be useful later on in this dungeon. But also one thing to note, I might be wrong here, but those golds, are they not spawning explosives at all? Because if they would spawn explosives, then of course it would be a very bad idea to just keep them up throughout the whole fight. But ever since I've been watching for the last 20 seconds, there haven't been any explosive spawning, so they must be not spawning them at all, which obviously increases the usefulness of this mastery strategy coming in from Method NA. Now when we look at the boss HP, 40K is 30%, while Method NA is on 20%. So Method NA definitely getting a better usage out of their Bloodlust, I feel like, just because they caught up so much on boss damage, and they're killing the boss definitely approximately 10% faster than 40K here.
Yeah, so one of the major benefits of actually running the mass entangling is that your melee don't really ever have to swap off in order to kill the animated golds. They can kind of just keep tunneling the boss, not really worrying about what's going on, while your healer does make sure that the mobs do stay far away. But the downside, like you were saying, is later on in the gauntlet room, we have a king, he casts the lightning rod. You normally are able to use Typhoon to be able to cancel the lightning rod, but JB has elected to go with mass route, like we have been saying.
Yeah, so Method NA downing the boss at this point, 5% ahead of 40K. Now, JB is going to drink up here, and then he's going to go back and kill those and pull those Guardians as he waits for the door to open, just running against it. Now, the rest of the team already moved on to this trash gauntlet that we're going to see later on, that you have to kill all 4 trash mobs, else the door doesn't open. So there's nothing you can skip in this gauntlet here. Now, on the tournament realm, there's a set rotation. It will start top left, and then it will go counterclockwise for everybody to, you know, just keep the integrity of the tournament, be fair for everybody. And this first pack here is a little bit difficult, mostly because of explosive.
Yeah, making sure that you're able to quickly down those explosives mobs, because the agents do actually spawn explosives, and it's about an 8 mob pack, so you're going to have a high likelihood of getting an explosive, but you do have the rogues that are able to easily swap them, killing them with pistol shot. And you do see the king pulled with the 2 animated guardians on the side of Method NA here, and making sure that they actually have a really efficient pull here. While they do wait for some of the RP in this gauntlet room, they'll be able to DPS down the animated guardians here.
Yeah, so the animated guardians, they do have a scary frontal, as we can see them casted right now on Method NA side. They will turn to a player and then have this long cast. When the cast goes through, there will be a frontal cone that does a lot of damage to you and stuns you if you get hit by it. So you definitely want to be careful about that. Want to make sure you're not getting hit. Once they go low, they actually also buff themselves with an enrage effect that cannot be dispelled by Raster Druids or Hunters for that matter. So you want to be watching out once they're low HP. And as you can see, them just kiting the mobs around here as they start to raid.
Yeah, and on the side of 40K, we're seeing a mirrored pull here with the double animated Guardians. A major difference to be pointing out is the difference in Bloodlust timing. We do have 40K's Bloodlust coming up in approximately 3.5 minutes, while Method NA's are coming up in approximately 5.5. So seeing the difference in if they choose to use it a little bit earlier, 40K would potentially use it on Machemba with the Reaping, and Method NA would potentially use it on the pack after Machemba. You do get about 3 Bloodlusts in this instance, as it is about a 25 to 27-ish minute instance normally, barring any like major mistakes here. You do see on the side of Method NA, Nerf ends up tanking the whole entire Reaping on top of this pack, making sure that they get interrupts here on the Queen, making sure that the King doesn't end up blade storming down any of your melee, and just kiting it out super well. On the side of 40K, we see the King and the Guard Captain here, making sure that they dispel that Enrage on the Guard Captain is very important, because the Guard Captain does cast an Axe Barrage cast, ending up putting a physical dot on the whole entire group unless it is line of sighted. So making sure that they definitely dispel the Enrage on that Guard Captain was actually very good by 40K.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, Method NA will get their Bloodlust back up on Machemba, and the last time they actually used it on the boss. They didn't save it for the pack later, and then they still did a pretty huge pull after the boss. They pulled the double Berserker, which other teams use Bloodlust for, but Method NA did the same pull without their Bloodlust, and they ended up having a lot of trouble, having some people die and struggle there. So we'll see if they this time around choose to hold on to this Bloodlust, not use it on the boss, but save it for this bigger pull afterwards. Now, 40K, on the other hand, they played this dungeon before, and all of their pulls later after this gauntlet actually were quite a bit safer than all of the other teams. They wouldn't pull the double Berserkers, they would pull the whole droplet room a little bit safer. Instead of pulling them all together, they would pull them half and half. So we'll see if 40K will do the same thing again, which I assume, because they played it earlier today, and they're not going to switch up their strategy within 2 hours. So they're probably going to do the same thing, and it will probably make it or break it at that exact moment, because if Method NA does not play it safe and actually pulls it off without any mistakes, then they're just going to be faster. Yeah,
basically we do see Method NA here getting one full gauntlet mob ahead of 40K here. We actually almost did see Igloo go down on the side of 40K. He got seduced by the Queen, ended up accidentally standing in a Shadow Smash as he was mind controlled, but he ended up being okay in the end. And we do see Method NA here popping Shroud, running past the Construct, and here they're going to be doing the Embalming Fluid pull.
Yeah, so the Embalming Fluid pull here is quite dangerous because of explosive mainly. Now, there's so many mobs, and the more mobs there are, the more chance of explosive spawns you're going to have, as we can see them spawning here already. Now, of course, rogues are very, very good at dealing with them, and monks too in general. So as long as they switch them immediately, they can deal with this pack alright. Of course, if there's 2 or 3 explosives coming through at the same time, then everything can go wrong really quickly. But the rogues are very good at killing explosives because they can cleave off of the explosive, which there's barely any other class that can do so. If another class switches to an explosive, they're able to kill them, but they're not going to do any damage to anything else at the same time. While rogues with Blade Flurry can actually cleave off of them, so very, very efficient for these explosive pulls, and we see Method NA dealing with it very well, moving on to this double constructs here.
Yeah, something I also want to highlight, JB was sitting in cat form for most of that Embalming Fluid pull, while Nerf was ending up kiting out the Embalming Fluids, not being able to really face tank that many mobs for prolonged periods of time. JB ended up doing about 40k DPS on that pack, and you did see it also get chained into the double construct. Whenever the constructs end up entombing you, it ends up putting you in the tomb that you are nearest to. So that's why they have both constructs on the side here, and they're both standing near this near side tomb right here, and you just end up opening it up, and you end up coming right out. You don't have to move very much, you have very minimal downtime, and you end up being able to do both of these constructs at once. So this is actually a very good pull on the side of Method NA. On the side of 40k, they end up doing some of the Embalming Fluids with the construct here, which is actually a pretty scary pull overall, but as long as people are able to get out of that entomb, then it's also super good. You see Igloo here positioning himself on the far side near where that entomb was going to come out, as he didn't see where his player was positioned.
Yeah, this is where you see the slower or safer strategy coming in from 40k compared to Method NA's riskier strategy, as Method NA already cleared the whole room, already on the boss with the Reaping Wave, while 40k chose to pull half of the boss room and then the other half of the boss room. And one more thing to mention is that they single killed the construct that most other teams used to skip with Shroud. Because it's very inefficient to just kill one mob by itself, as we mentioned earlier. But for some reason, 40K chooses route, maybe to get proper reaping timing, or maybe they can skip something later on. But yeah, just this safer strat from them coming in, it works for them. But as I said, Method and I just are faster. So if they don't mess anything up, then they should be winning this dungeon just because of their faster strategy.
So something that's definitely interesting and of note is that 40K is actually doing reaping with one of the constructs, and they end up actually having Bloodlust available to them right now. I think they should have been looking to do reaping with Machimba, and if they are so scared of this reaping with Machimba, maybe they end up using Bloodlust on him in a second. But they end up killing about half the reaping and then pulling Machimba and separating out the constructs, like you were saying. Overall, I think that's a pretty slow pull unless they really believe that this reaping that they're getting is a little bit better than what normally you end up getting. On the side of Method and A, though, their Bloodlust isn't up yet. It looks like both teams are going to probably be electing to be using their Bloodlust to the pull after Machimba here with the Berserkers. The Berserkers obviously put a pretty hefty bleed on you, and being able to consolidate them in fewer pulls is very important for these teams.
Yeah, maybe 40K actually switching up their strategy a little bit here. As you see, Rentari actually go down here. We need to cast a Rebirth from Igloo coming in. Thankfully, they did manage to recover at this point. The Rentari is back up. They should be alright. But now they only have one battle rest left, of course. Thankfully, nothing more happened at this point. But one difference, okay, so now they're popping their Bloodlust on 40K set, because this is what they did last time as well. I was just thinking maybe they're changing up their strategy and doing a bigger Berserker pool later, but no, they're choosing to use their Bloodlust here, are continuing to play safe, even after this boss most likely, while Method and A is on 20% on the Embalmer here, and they're most likely choosing to do this big pull. And as I mentioned as well, this time around they're not going to use this Bloodlust. Last time they did use the Bloodlust on a boss. Then they didn't have it for the next pull, and they ended up wiping. So this time, safer play by Method and A, saving their Bloodlust, probably using it for next trash bag. Now, the Embalmer boss itself, you know, it shouldn't be a big deal for any of them. I'm not sure what Rentari died, I'm not sure if you paid attention, but in theory, it shouldn't be a big deal for either of those teams.
So Machimba actually melees. He's one of the hardest bosses melee out of any of the bosses in the game. I think Rentari ended up just getting melee down there by Machimba. Nothing like mechanically ended up killing him, but he just ended up getting melee down, got a little bit lower than Igloo was able to catch up while they were trying to deal with the entombs. So something also to note is I wonder why 40K ended up waiting so long on Machimba in order to be able to Bloodlust him. And on the side of Method EU, or Method NA, you actually saw something cool. Nerf ended up running in the middle of those two Hex Priests, and he ends up spell reflecting both of the Spectral Bolts back at them. Then he ends up pulling a pretty big pack, and they end up popping Bloodlust here, which is something that we've been pointing out. Doubling up on this pull of Berserkers is very important, and it allows you to make up so much time in this instance, just making sure that you're able to merge these two packs into one.
Yeah, this time definitely looks a lot safer on Method and A sides on this pull. Not having any explosives go through, not having too many Berserker bleeds on random members. The last time, I believe it was Lighting with a double stack from the Berserkers, which is of course very dangerous. It's already dangerous on a tank, so it's going to be even more dangerous on a DPS that can't get rid of it somehow, like being a dwarf or something like that. So they managed to pull up this pretty substantial trash pull, so very well done by Method and A, cleaning up their play from the last time around. As they continue to pull even more now, there's some dangerous trash here in this pull as well, as we have the Beastmaster, which needs to be focused, of course, and needs to be interrupted on the Deadly Shot and on the Poison Barrages we see come out here. And the Brute, just a high HP mob, doesn't really do that much, except this huge circle AoE that if you get hit by it, you will get knocked and get a lot of damage. Other than that, the Brute is not very dangerous.
Yeah, but the Brute is dangerous in a different way. The Brute ends up doing a ground crush, which you have to get out of, but if there are explosives that spawn near the Brute during the ground crush, then we could see Method NA maybe have an explosive go off, which would actually be very scary for them as a whole. But overall, this pull with the Brute, the Raptor, and everything looks pretty good here. You do see two explosives spawn on the side of Method NA, and then on the side of 40K, they're finally doing their first pull after Machimba. It's just the single Berserker and the double Hex Priest pull. So they end up not being able to double it up like we did see on the side of Method NA because they did not have Bloodlust.
Yeah, so Method and A are about to finish up this pull. They are triggering their 80% reaping at this point. They're most likely pulling the reaping into one of the next trash here. There's one Berserker left that they CC'd earlier. There's the Hex Priest and some, just some casters. Now, this is dangerous because there's a lot of things going on and you don't have a lot of space if you tank it on this bridge. Now, you do have all the reaping mobs, of course, applying debuffs to nerf. You have those stones on the ground that need to dodge. And on top of that, you have the Berserker applying this bleed to you. You have the the mobs just raging and explosive spawning everywhere. So definitely need to watch out here as we see the crowd control coming in with the AoE stun and of course the Ring of Peace from Lighty.
Yeah, the not being able to kite this pack because of the Berserkers and because of the Reaping is actually the most important part. Most of the time you kind of want to be walking away from Reaping as to not be like looking to face tank the mobs the whole entire time, but being in melee range with the Berserker in order to be able to absorb that bleed is very important. However, it is also important to note that both Shakib and Yoda are both playing dwarfs, and they end up having the racial where you're able to remove the bleed if you do get it on you. So the bleed goes on the person who's nearest the target if the tank is not inside of melee range. So making sure that if Nerf does in fact need to kite, making sure that the rogues are the two nearest people in order to be able to racial off that bleed is important for them. On the side of Fourty, they're making their way through this hallway. They're pulling the Brute Pack with the Raptor, just making sure that they're able to get consistent pulls with this Beastmaster Raptor Pack, and they end up pulling Reaping into it as well.
Yeah, so Method NA doing this pull that we've seen from Method U for the very first time, that a lot of people, a lot of teams have adapted to this pull, pretty much copying from Method U, which is a very, very good strat in my opinion, because they are pulling these two packs together, but they're not pulling all of them up. So you can see the Berserker and the Hexpriest are CC'd there in the back. There's one being in-capped, one being blinded by one of the rogues. Now what they're doing is they're pulling two packs together, but they don't need all of the percentage, because now they're already at 96% without those two. And now they going to the boss, shadow melting away the aggro from those CC'd mobs, and now they have perfect percentage, only needing this last mini boss to get the 100%.
Yeah, and this is where those two mobs that we did see JB getting at the very beginning of the instance come back into play. This is how they're able to get the rest of their count that they need to where they don't have to pull those mobs, and they can just go back to the Shadow of Zul after this council fight. So for the first boss of this council fight, we have Kula the Butcher, obviously the most scary boss in this council fight, as she does put a bleed on a random party member. Additionally, she does have these axes whirling around the room. If you do hit them, they'll end up putting a dot on you. The dot's pretty scary, but by far the most the scariest dot is the whirling the axe dot that she ends up putting on a single member. Making sure that JB is able to heal that up, making sure that he has the group kind of pre-hotted and get ready for that severing axe to come out is very important.
Yeah, so we see the severing axe going on Yoda here. Now he is a dwarf, right? So he would be able to get rid of it if he wanted to. Maybe his racial is just not ready at this moment, so JB needs to heal it off here. It is a 20-second debuff that takes for a lot of damage, as you can see him dropping lower and lower, but it should not be a problem for JB to heal away. Now, the rotation on this council, but there's 3 bosses, and depending on live service, there will be a different rotation each week, starting with a different boss. Now, when the bosses die, they continue to cast one of their abilities throughout the rest of the fight. Now, I do believe that Kula being first is actually the easiest rotation, because Kula is the most difficult boss, and you don't have any of the passives from the other bosses while fighting her. So I think this is actually a pretty good rotation for the teams here.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the easier rotations for this fight as well. In addition to that, we do see Fourty having engaged this fight as well. They have Kula down to 35%, but something to note is the side of Method NA is at 96% count, while Fourty is only at 86% count. So they are 1 to 2 trash packs behind the side of Method NA here.
Yeah, so Method NA will, as I said, will only have to kill the mini boss, which you have to kill anyway, because else you're not going to get access to the last boss. Well, Fourty has to still do some trash right after this boss, meaning that even if they're on the same boss right now, they're still pretty far behind just because of this trash pack missing. Now, again, 40 didn't really mess up anything big. They have 2 deaths, of course, but they didn't have a big wipe or anything. It's just the difference in strategy here. Method NA just playing a little bit riskier, having those bigger pulls, while 40 just taking it a little bit slower on their safer side. Now, it did work for them the last time where they won against Palooka, but this time Method NA just, you know, showing again that today they're just playing so clean, having their perfect strategies. Just a very good showing from Method NA here so far.
Yeah, the cleanliness of all the runs for Method NA that we've seen today has actually put them in a really good position here in King's Rest. King's Rest really punishes mistakes. It has a really far run back time as some of the checkpoints. There aren't really any checkpoints until you do get this council fight down, except for at the very beginning. There's also like a Gilded Loa that you can ride back towards the bridge, but that's obviously not the best checkpoint for a lot of the teams. Something also to be aware of as well is that Method NA's Bloodlust timing. Method NA has about 3 minutes on Bloodlust, while 40 has about 2-ish. There's not going to be any difference in the Bloodlust usage. Typically, people end up Bloodlusting on Dazar whenever both Raptors are out. So there ended up being a pretty big difference in the timer on this dungeon because of 40K's choice of using Bloodlust during Machemba, whereas Method NA ended up using it on the pack after Machemba.
Sorry, I just saw Lady jumping off the platform, and I got so hyped because he was dodging the ability from Akali here. So there's a barrel through, as you can see, being casted right now on Yoda. Now, what he can do with this ability, he can actually cancel it by using multiple abilities. You can use Vanish as a rogue. You can jump off the platform, because if you're off the platform, then he can't charge you, and he will cancel the ability and use a different target. Now, we saw Lady just jump off and teleport back up to cancel it, which pretty much makes Akali not do anything. Now, I personally am not the biggest fan of trying to really risk delaying this barrel through, because I think Akali is not actually a very dangerous boss at all. This barrel through, if it goes through as you just saw on Method NA's side, really doesn't do that much damage as long as you soak it with the whole group. So, you know, risking it and jumping off, maybe not being able to get back up, I think is a little bit too risky, because, you know, this boss is not very scary at all.
But dropping a Transcendence for a Monk, I don't think it actually makes it it doesn't make it too scary. You're able to easily get back up as long as he does place the Transcendence and doesn't end up outraging it. While the opportunity cost for that being is JB's DPS. JB would end up having to heal back up the group through the barrel through. Otherwise, he gets to just sit there in cat form and DPS for a pretty easy Transcendence on the side of Lighty. While it might not be
it doesn't do a lot of
the risk is definitely. The risk is definitely not worth the reward, in case if Lighty does fall off, then you're not able to res him. Is like the reasoning behind why it's not super good. But you do see on the side of Fourty, they are getting Akali down pretty low. They are at 86% on trash, while Method NA just needs to kill the Shadow of Zul, and then they are getting their final reaping of the dungeon. Yeah,
so the Shadow of Zul, definitely a dangerous mini boss, but it's not fortified. So definitely a little bit of an easier time here by it not being buffed. But you can see Nerf Clap just dropping very low. You can see JB is not in cat form, not doing damage right now, because he needs to spam heal Nerf Clap, because he constantly has this Shadow Barrage dot on him, which just constantly ticks for shadow damage, and Warrior's not very known for dealing with shadow damage that well compared to physical damage, of course. Now, the other abilities that Shadow of Zul does don't really matter that much. They're not that dangerous. Sometimes he has zone spawn that will do pulsing AoE damage, but it only has a 15 yards range. Actually, we can see it spawn right now. Now, this time they can't actually outrange it, because, as I said, it's 15 yards range, the pulsing damage. But because it spawned right next to the Shadow of Zul, they actually had one of the rogues have to go in and soak it. Now, it only does a little bit of damage to them, so it was no problem.
Man, that was actually super scary there for Nerf. We saw the Shadow of Zul enrage because of the enraging effects, and it ended up getting 2 of his casts off onto Nerf while enraged, and Nerf almost ended up going down because of that.
Yeah, so JB a little bit slow on that Soothe. You know, mini bosses and raging is a little bit of a problem, especially if they're so dangerous like the Shadow of Zul. So if you remember and if you don't forget about the raging effect, you definitely have to be ready as a druid. Just mouse over in your Soothe button pretty much, and as soon as the raging comes in, you need to press that button to make sure it gets off. So Nerf Clap definitely good on him for surviving the raging debuff on him, as they're done with the Reaping Wave. They Shadow melted the Reaping Wave off, so they have to 100% trash at this point while they engage the last boss fight. Now, Fourty still in the Shadow of Zul, so they're pretty far behind still. Of course, also having those 2 deaths, while Method NA has 0 deaths.
Yeah, so basically we do see Fourty dealing with the Shadow of Zul here. Just something important for them. They really need to make sure that they soothe that Shadow of Zul whenever it does hit the enrage at the bottom 30% of its health. We do see Method NA here on Dazar dealing with him quite well. We're going to see them popping Bloodlust as soon as Dazar does mount up on that second Raptor here in just a couple more seconds.
Yeah, we see Raban here already spawning. Now, Raban is not very dangerous. It just jumps to that player and casts his Hunting Leap, as you can see right now, so all you have to do is walk out of it. That's why we see it be alive for so long, because usually teams just don't focus it. They just keep attacking the boss just to get the boss down faster, as we see JB actually dropping really low from one of those boss leaps. But yeah, once the boss reaches lower percent, you will see Salah spawn, and that Raptor is actually a lot more dangerous than Raban.
Yeah, and the blade combo is actually super dangerous to Nerf as well. You do see Nerf sitting here about 80 to... He's been sitting about 60 to 80-ish percentile health, but whenever the Dazar does mount up, he ends up casting a group-wide fear. Obviously, Nerf can end up Berserker raging the first one to where he doesn't get feared, but the second fear cast will end up fearing him if they do get one off. You do see them popping Bloodlust here and trying to nerf down Dazala as quickly as they possibly can.
Yeah, so that's why they're, of course, saving their Bloodlust exactly for this moment, just to get as a few amounts of fears as possible, because this group fear can just be so dangerous, not only for Nerf, but also for everyone else. Just having those tornadoes going around, those gale slashes, if you get hit by those, you get a nasty debuff on you, as both Lighty and Shakib had it and dropping very low. Then there's also the danger with explosive, right? You could get an explosive orb spawning, then you get feared and you can't kill them because you're feared, and then it goes off, can cause a lot of problems here. That's why they managed to use their Bloodlust, burst it down, and now they only have King Desart left to deal with. And at this point, there's not that many things that can wipe them anymore.
Yeah, and we also do see on the side of 40K, they've finally got Raban spawned as they do get Desart to 80 percentile health. They dealt with the Shadow of Zul, looked like they only got a couple of deaths there, and they end up having 3 deaths overall in the dungeon. Overall, Method NA has actually had a really clean run, looking like they're about to finish this dungeon with 0 deaths.
Yeah, so Method NA definitely doing a very good job today in general. No mess ups here in this dungeon at all. 0 deaths, super clean run by Method NA, and also, you know, just having the faster route compared to 40K. Now, 40K on the other side, they also didn't really have any big mess ups. They do have their 3 deaths, of course, but, you know, no huge setback. They played their route well. They definitely, you know, just did their route. They knew what they were doing. They chose to do the safer route, of course. They saw other teams doing King's Rest as well, and they chose to play this route. Maybe they put some more practice to some more riskier strats in other dungeons. But yeah, shout out to both of those teams doing a pretty good job. Method NA though, just, you know, cleaner strat, a cleaner play, and congrats on a clean win here.
Yeah, JB has also been doing an incredible amount of damage here on Dazar. He looks like he's about at 9.6k DPS here on Dazar for the whole entire fight, which is actually incredibly high for a Resto Druid, especially since you do have to end up healing those Quaking Leaps up, and that will do it for King's Rest.
Very powerful performance here by Method NA, playing like the team we've been seeing all day today here. Is ironic. Very clean run throughout King's Rest.
Yeah, I think this is really not something we didn't expect. We saw a sort of clean run from 40K earlier today. With their time in that clean run was 29:30. It's about 3 minutes slower than what Method EU's time in King's Rest was earlier in the Cup. So as long as Method NA could put together a relatively clean run, they were going to win this dungeon. Now, we saw they just had superior routing throughout almost the entire dungeon. In the main room that they really kind of gained that advantage of was in this Embalmer room. Instead of breaking up the pool into 2 like 40K did, they pulled all of the slimes in that room as well as both of the constructs in that dungeon, and that just kind of set them firmly ahead in the dungeon.
And as we're going through the rest of this, they also did a great job taking on that council fight there, offering great control, people using their defenses properly here to mitigate as much as they really could here. And we've seen that a couple times of just rogues going into dwarves as an example here, Tettles, being able to use that stone form, remove some of those bleed effects and stuff, and makes it a lot easier for their healer.
Yeah, for Kula the Butcher on the council fight, in addition to that, the Berserkers, making sure that you do have that stone form racial from the dwarf. Access to that from Yoda and Shakib is actually very good for those rogues. Basically, rogues don't end up needing to be Night Elf because they don't need Shadow Meld because they have Vanish in their kit passively. So them adapting and playing Dwarf during this set was actually very good for King's Rest.
Yeah, and as we're moving on to Shrine of the Storm, though, this has been a dungeon that has claimed the lives of many teams going into this one, Nagura. At this point, we're going to take a quick break before we break it all down. But don't go anywhere, guys. 40K versus Method NA will continue right after this break. Method NA up 1-0 over 40K here as we move on into Shrine of the Storm. This dungeon has been the bane of many a team's existence as we've gone out throughout this one. And Zyronic, what do you think about this matchup between both of them? They both had some sloppy runs throughout 2 tournaments that we've seen them so far.
Yeah, we've both seen them in Shrine of the Storm, seen both of these teams in Shrine of the Storm this cup, and I'm pretty sure we haven't seen either team kill the 3rd boss yet, if that's a little bit telling.
Yeah.
Both of their dungeons, the other team just kind of dominated them in, so we'll have to actually see if they can clean up their act in this dungeon.
They really will need to, and especially since we've seen so much growth from both of them, not only in terms of personal performance here, but also in execution for strategies. I think some of the big areas is not only after that bridge, moving into the 2nd boss room that has been so dangerous, but also right after the 1st boss here, Nagura, having to deal with some of the trash packs in that very narrow hallway in between both mini bosses here. What do you think that Method NA needs to do to get through that one cleanly?
I think Method NA just needs to continue their play from today, except those big mess ups that they have. So their strategies have improved, definitely. They have been playing some cleaner strats, some better strats, so I like that. But Shrine of the Storm is definitely a very not forgiving dungeon at all. If you make a big mistake, even if it's not a big mistake, even just a small mistake can cost you a lot of time here. If you mess up a skip, if you have your healer die somewhere without a battle rest. So definitely you gotta watch out for that. Gotta watch out for JB not making sure that he dies anywhere, and making sure that they clean up their skips as well, because any skip going wrong here will cost you a lot of time.
We've seen some of the deaths going out through there, and even having the specific highlight on the JB, it's been that kind of balance for healers, really. How much damage is too much that they're going to be dealing here? We saw it on Waycrest, who's still kind of in cat form at that very last pull there, wasn't actually able to put up enough healing, and then something goes wrong here, Tettles. Where do you find that right balance whenever you're going into those kind of runs?
I mean, so for MDI style stuff, we do know JB is a pretty high DPS player by nature, and it is high risk, high reward a lot of the time. Just knowledge on your group and knowledge on the damage patterns as a healer is very important. I don't think JB is ever in cat form whenever he should not be, but he does end up being in cat form at points where he could be able to save his team, however.
And as we're going into this, getting ready for the Shrine of the Storm, this could be the very game that sends 40K home and Method NA to the grand finals for their rematch going up against Method EU. Diving into it in Shrine of the Storm.
Yeah, so Shrine of the Storm, again, so many things went wrong for a lot of teams in this dungeon, because any sort of small mistake will cause a disaster. So we'll see how those teams clean up their play here. 40K and Method NA both had some problems earlier in Shrine, but we'll see what happens this time around.
Yeah, we do see 40K doing a pretty small pull here, pulling the initiates as they do apply a large amount of stacks of bursting to the whole entire group. It looks about 6 stacks there, as we do see the whole entire group getting pretty low. Method NA electing to not deal with any of those initiates, as they are high likelihood of wiping them, and they end up shrouding through, looking like they're prepping for a pretty big pull here as well.
Yeah, so we see some of the CC coming through here, because at the start there's a lot of casters, right? And the problem is you can do a big pull, and we see actually some people going down on 40K side dealing with this Templar here, probably because of necrotic and bursting at the same time, because having bursting stacks while you're not being able to get healed at all because of the necrotic is a big problem, especially in Shrine here, because there's so many small HP mobs that apply necrotic to you, as we see even Lowfish is getting so many stacks here.
Yeah, we actually did see Nerf hitting about 25 stacks in necrotic there, as they are dealing with the Templar, the double Spiritualist, and the double Attendants. Nerf ended up kiting those mobs back, trying to not deal with them, and just trying to line of sight them, getting them away from him so they're not casting on anybody, and they're moving towards him while the rest of his group is DPSing down the mobs, making sure that they kick the heal from the Spiritualist and making sure that they get the Protective Veil from the Templar, the damage reduction that he does cast, kicked as well.
Yeah, so Method NA also did quite a big pull while having the CC go out. As I talked about, there's a lot of casters here. Now, pulling a lot of casters together, if they're really spread out in their original position, is very dangerous, because you don't want to be pulling, running through them, getting shot in the back, and so on. That's why you started to see come out first, so a Nerf can walk on one side while one of the rogues walk the other side. You got the tricks in the tank, making sure it's a clean pull together. And now Method NA pulling some more of those casters to this bottom side. Now you see those anchors come out as well, which actually get casted on ranged targets only. So JB is the only eligible target for those anchors. As you can see, those swirly spawn. He needs to make sure that he's not putting too many of them into melee, of course, because it will hinder the melee players and the tank.
So looks like 40K actually ended up pulling that Living Current. You do see Wolf Disco here dying, but it looks like the rest of his group oh man, looks like the rest of his group might be in combat, just a few members maybe. The Living Current actually does have true sight, so whenever they were shrouding past it, it looked like somebody ended up accidentally just face pulling it in the shroud, with the mob just like turning, looking at them, engaging in combat with them, and then killing 3 members of 40K. On the side of Method NA, you do see the 4 Spiritualist pull that they were doing, making sure that they interrupt the Mending Rapids cast is actually very important on the side of Method NA. It looks like Igloo is getting the mass res off on the side of 40K though, so it looks like it's going to be all right, even though they did pull that Living Current, which actually is going to end up wasting them a significant amount of time.
Yeah, thankfully Igloo did not get in combat here, so usually the Living Current, which some of you really do not want to pull, because not only does it have a lot of HP, but will also have this one ability where the whole group gets knocked into the air. While you're knocked, you can't do anything, you're stunned in the air, and it's just very, very dangerous. So you don't want to deal with this at all. That's why we see all those teams skipping it, but as you said, they messed up their skip somehow. Thankfully, Igloo did not get in combat, managed to rest them back up, but they still have 4 deaths on the board now, 20 seconds, and they lost a lot of time from having to rest and everything. While Method NA already procced their Reaping Wave, Shadow melted it off, while Shadow melting also the rest of the trash, which is the usual skip that we see in Shrine, while 40K actually chooses a little bit of a different route.
Yeah, so I actually like the strategy for Method NA a little bit more. It makes that Living Current a little bit more consistent. If you don't get a great distract off on it, or if you accidentally kind of clip the wall while you're trying to do your shroud around the Living Current, you'll end up accidentally pulling it like we did see on the side of 40K. Overall, it's very good that we did not see a full wipe from the side of 40K. They end up shadow melting off their Reaping as well. This Reaping obviously is one of the most dangerous Reapings in the game, as it is a full like caster Reaping. So they end up casting Grave Bolts on you, so making sure that you actually shadow melt it off is very good. On 40K, they actually have Bloodlust for Accuseer, while we did see Method NA elect to use Bloodlust on the first pull of the instance. So that's going to be a little bit different here. We actually do see a lot of the Reaping falling in here for 40K, as they're trying to deal with it while dealing with Accuseer.
Yeah, so 40K doing a very dangerous pull here, as they probably did not have their Shadow Melt ready to skip the Sweeping because of this failed Shroud pull earlier, right? So they had the rest of the Igloo use the Shadow Melt to make the rest available to them, and now they don't have the Shadow Melt ready. They have to play the Reaping with the boss. They thankfully did have their Bloodlust ready to deal with it, but this is just so dangerous because having all of these casters, as Teddles mentions, it's just so difficult to interrupt them all with AoE stuns and stuff like that, but they managed to kill them here, so very well done for 40K recovering from this failed skip here, while Method NA is almost in intermission phase already.
Yeah, Accuseer actually does split into 3 different mobs whenever he does hit 50%, 3 Aqualings here. They need to be tanked by the members of Method NA as well, having 1 person on each of them so they don't end up casting that Sea Blast, as you do see it getting cast into JB because he's not in melee range of that Aqualing. It ends up, so it's casting over and over again, and it finally gets interrupted and starts casting that Choking Brine. You do see on the side of Nerf, he ends up having to pop his shield wall there. As he does get incredibly low, you actually do see they have 1 Templar and 2 Apprentices that need to make sure that they're getting interrupted as well on the side of Method NA. So that was actually very scary for them, and I'm kind of surprised that Nerf didn't end up going down. JB was just out of range of the Aqualings.
He still has 25 stacks, he's low HP. JB has such trouble keeping him up here because of the necrotic stacks, right? But now the stacks actually dropped, so it should be safe here at this point. The Aqualings are about to go down. Now in this intermission phase, it's just, there's so many dangerous things that can happen, especially because of necrotic, right? Because as Teddles mentioned, you need to tank them, and the tank can't, because he needs to be close to them to be able to tank them. The tank can't take them all, so you need some, either the healer or the DPS tanking some of the Aqualings, and they will actually melee you and apply necrotic to you as well. So you have 3 members with necrotic in your group while all those other abilities are going on, but very well done by Method NA dealing with the intermission phase and the adds on top of it too. Now Shakib Epic got meleeed by the boss there once he spawned, almost going down, but he still has his cheat death available to him, so it shouldn't be a big deal to finish up this boss fight here.
Yeah, we're going to see 40K downing Accuseer first. Obviously there's a major difference here in percent, as 40K is only at 20% on the trash, while Method NA is at 33% with Accuseer sitting at 4% health. They're also going to get a couple more count from those 4 initiates that they ended up pulling, and they're going to be looking to skip this very, very deadly mini-boss.
Yeah, so there's a lot of mini-bosses in this dungeon, which are not only dangerous to deal with, especially in a 45 setting, but they're also about so much HP that it's not really worth it for the percentage that they give. So we see Method NA doing this skip where you just kind of jump on the left ledge of the room to make sure you don't aggro this mini-boss, because it also has a true side, of course. And then both 40K and Method NA are in this tiny little hallway here where they pull a bunch of mobs together. Now, those mobs are in theory not that dangerous if you manage to kite them properly, but in this tiny hallway there's not that much room to kite, so you need to make sure you use the Ring of Peace properly. You need to make sure you use your AoE stun properly, and you definitely don't want to have a lot of necrotic stacks on nerf, because there's a bunch of casters who also deal a lot of damage on top of that.
We've seen multiple types of this pull on the side of Method NA. We've seen a bunch of groups doing 2 packs of these Iron Hole Apprentices, but we have seen a couple of groups doing 3 packs of the Iron Hole Apprentices. Obviously, consolidating your pulls and pulling a little bit bigger is always better, but on the side of Method NA, I think doing just 2 packs of these Iron Hole Apprentices is very good for them, because I think pulling 3 just puts you at an unnecessary risk, because if you do end up wiping for some reason, you actually struggle to get back past this point in the instance due to there not being a checkpoint at Accuseer, and you've already shadow melted off all that reaping, so it's all just standing there at the very beginning of the instance. So making sure that you do a safe pull and making sure that the Shrine of the Storm is clean is normally the reason that we actually see teams struggle so heavily here.
Good job, Method. Okay, so they managed to get their their skip done here. They skipped the reaping plus this mini boss plus a lot of trash. So they did mess up this skip before. So thankfully this time around they did it perfectly. They did have Nerf wait for everyone else to go through, and then he leaps forward, and then everyone shadow melts to get rid of the reaping plus the mobs. Now this is a pretty significant pull. They're pulling a bunch of the reaping mobs that are left plus a lot of packs together. So we see Nerf just kiting here because of all this necrotic, and you can see just how much damage is going on Nerf here.
Yeah, and this is also very scary for Nerf as soon as Bursting comes out as well. Because he is sitting at 22 stacks of necrotic, he actually can't get healed to his full potential, and you actually still see JB running Mass Entangling previously from that King's Rest.
That was probably a mistake. Yeah, definitely a mistake.
So it looked like he needed to probably want to knock those casts right there, and he accidentally forgot that he was still running Mass Entangling as opposed to running Typhoon there. So that's definitely probably a mistake on the side of JB, but I don't think it's actually going to end up costing them anything. Nerf actually does get a reset on necrotic here before those apprentices do end up going down. On the side of 40K, it looks like they've ended up pulling the Rune Carver here, which is a mod that we don't actually see pulled very often. It ends up putting a protective ward on the ground, and it ends up carving your flesh. So basically the flesh carve is actually a very deadly cast, and you have to make sure that you're in the protective room for the duration of the cast, otherwise you will likely go down because it does do so much damage. That mob does give a pretty sizable amount of percent, but I don't think we've actually seen it pulled by any other team except for 40K up until this point.
Yeah, I don't think so either. Now they did pull this last trash pack here before this bridge mini boss, the elemental. Now no one wants to pull the elemental, so they definitely want to make sure they skip it afterwards. But Method NA doing the same shadow skip that we saw from Method EU come out first, not dealing with these initiates. I like this adaptation by Method NA here, this copying Method EU strat, because those initiates, oh, we see Nerf drop really low, he might end up dying. SJB dies. Okay, this is a disaster for them. They do not have a rest for GB, so Lighty needs to survive here. Lighty needs to reset the boss and survive. Okay. Okay, good. They managed to reset. They didn't lose that much from this pull.
That was so bad. Okay, so they ended up pulling the 2 packs of initiates into the boss, but one of them ended up fleeing as it did get low health, and then it ended up rolling the 7 stack into an 8 stack at the very last second after JB's Trank had already faded, and Method NA ended up wiping over it. On the side of 40K, though, you do see them ended up wiping to the reaping, so I guess Method NA really is in a better spot, even though it did have a little bit of a fumble there.
Okay, so 40K messed up their skip, the reaping skip, right? Which we've talked about earlier. Method NA messed up in a previous game. So what pretty much happened is they killed this last trash pack. They wanted to go through the elemental, then shadow melt on the other side, skip the trash plus the reaping at the same time. But something went wrong with the skip. They all died, and now they have to go back, and they will have to re-kill some of the reaping that they skipped earlier because they have true sight, so they can't go past it. Now, Method NA is still in their front seat here at this point, because even though they had to reset, it didn't actually cost them so much time, at least not as much as 40K's mess up will cost them. So Method NA on their pull here, they do have their Bloodlust available to them now, so that is good for them to not have it lost earlier in their pull. Now this boss is pretty difficult, and we've seen them struggle in the past with this boss. Well, JB actually died on one of their pulls here.
Yeah, whenever 40K was looking to do that run back, obviously they killed most of that reaping because they didn't have their meld available to them earlier. But it looked like they accidentally pulled the... It looks like they've pulled the Wind Speaker with the initiates on accident. In addition to that, they accidentally pulled the Living Current, and then they ended up having to blow their Shadow Meld there. Now they're dealing with the Wind Speaker on the side of 40K, which is really weird because we haven't seen the Wind Speaker killed by any other team up until this point.
Yeah, so what happens is if you skip this Wind Speaker once, she will actually turn around into a different location. She will not reset and look in the same direction, she will look in a different direction. And that is going to be a lot harder for you to skip it if you want to jump on the left ledge. Maybe they did not have any of their shrouds ready or know this distract. Something went wrong, so they have to kill it now to also get their skip available. But yeah, so 40K very far behind at this point. Now, let's keep our eyes on Method NA as they're about to kill this second boss here. Galecaller Faye already dead. Now, you've probably noticed that Galecaller Faye actually had a bunch of casts that went through that were not interrupted by Method NA. That's because they don't want a lot of tornadoes spawning. Now, once in a while, she will buff herself, and if you interrupt the Tempest cast while she's buffed, then you will actually get those tornadoes, and they will at some point just cover the whole room if you keep interrupting her, right? And with this full melee lineups, just having everyone wanting to do damage, JB of course wants to do damage too, you want to have as little tornadoes as possible in the room.
Yeah, we do actually see the mini-boss going down on the side of 40K. Brother Ironhole at 17%. You see them kind of pulling trash into Brother Ironhole as he's not super deadly by himself. Most of the time, the reason that this boss is deadly is because of that Galecaller having that area denial that we talk about so much with the tornadoes, making sure that the melee don't have great use of the room. So once Galecaller Faye does go down, it's always a really good time to start pulling other trash into Brother Ironhole. Just making sure that they're super diligent about having cooldowns available for this bursting is very important, as we did actually see JB go down previously on this boss.
Yeah, so I did like the initial Nerf Club actually die here as I have another 7 stacks of bursting, but the necrotic just disappeared because he actually managed to get rid of the stacks. So thankfully he did manage to heal those 7-8 stacks bursting. Now they have to be careful with this bursting, right? Because we did see the initiate skip coming in just because of that reason. We saw Method EU doing the strat skip, skipping the initiate because of bursting, because you don't want to kill it slowly, you don't want to kill him one by one, and he also, you know, it just takes too much time. So Method NA definitely has to be a little bit more careful here, as they only need 2% to skip their next reaping, and then we're probably going to see another Shadow Melt skip here.
Yeah, I actually think the pull by Method NA, whenever they initially pulled Galecaller Faye and Brother Ironhole, was actually pretty good. But the reason that it ended up going so badly is we did see that one initiate just fleeing at such low health, and it ends up accidentally dying to dots, and then just rolling them over from 7 to 8. It ends up wiping them. Overall, it's not going to end up costing them anything. On the side of 40K, they end up doing a pretty sizable pull, but they are just so far behind Method NA as currently. We do see Method NA here pulling these Abyss Dwellers and these other mobs inside of this room. We haven't seen this pulled entirely too much with these Drowned Deathbringers and stuff like that, but overall, this pull is going to be looking to give them their third reaping of the instance.
Yeah, and this is a very interesting pull because they also have these enforcers here. You see Nerf Clubs running in a circle, trying to kite those enforcers because he doesn't want to get hit by it while having all those two casters cast on him as well. Now, they did manage to proc their reaping with this exact pull. Now they Shadow Melted off most of the reaping mobs. The rest of them, you can see here, they have to deal with anyway. Now, you still have those two enforcers, which didn't de-aggro, so they have to deal with them as well. And then they still have to do some of the... We saw Shakib dying, but it's not a problem. They do have a rest available here.
Yeah, so Shakib just got deep smashed there by the enforcer. He was too close to that enforcer whenever it started casting the cast, because Nerf is looking to kite, not build up too many necrotic stacks as they are making their way through the instance. Like you said, it ended up not costing them too much because they just end up burning a battle res there, but it's a battle res that they're not going to be able to get back.
Most definitely, but they still have one left now. 65% trash for Method NA. They do not have enough trash yet to skip this whole bridge, so they definitely have to kill some trash here. As we see them pretty much engage those two cultists. Now the cultists spawn those two tentacles, as you can see. They are dangerous to deal with as long... but if you stay in range as a tank, it shouldn't be a big problem. If you go away as a tank, then they will start casting an AoE, which is very dangerous, obviously. So you also see the mental assault from those cultists coming through, which you have to dodge out of. If you don't, then you do get stunned.
The scariest part of these tentacles is the fact that you actually have to be face tanking them the whole entire time, as we do see Nerf sitting at 30-ish stacks of necrotic here. So that's why he's dipping so incredibly low here. He might end up going down, but overall the pull looks like it's almost over, so it might not end up mattering even if he does end up going down here.
Is Nerf just trying to kite here as the last tentacle died. He actually managed to go away out of melee range to not get hit by those cultists to refresh their stack. Now we'll probably see them go around these packs. Oh no, they're actually pulling the left pack together. Okay, so we saw the Ring of Peace coming out here. One interesting thing to note about Ring of Peace is that it actually does not put you in combat if you use it on enemy mobs. So we saw it coming in from Livy here on the right pack while also having a distract, so they can make sure to only pull a left pack and not have them both aggro at the same time. Now, these cultists here, as we talked about earlier, just have this frontal cast that is very dangerous that you have to dodge out of. Otherwise, all of the dangerous casts are interruptible. So as long as you have a proper assignments, as we can see the mobs being marked with triangles and moons, as long as you assign them to each melee each, you should not have a struggle here.
Yeah, and on the side of 40K, we have recently seen them pull Gale Collar Faye and Brother Ironhole, popping Bloodlust here, making sure that they are able to kill that third Reaping that they ended up getting a little bit of. On the side of Method NA, we actually did see Nerf pop his Bwonsomni's Bargain cheat death style trinket there on that previous pull with the tentacles. So that's something that he's not going to have it to his disposal, and he might end up accidentally going down due to tanking too much damage at some point, but I think it's highly unlikely at this point.
So the only thing left between Method NA and the last boss trash room is those two Dweller packs. Now those Dweller packs are pretty dangerous because once you engage them, they will randomly cast a lash on random members. Now if you get unlucky, you can get 6 or 7 lash casts on one player, almost one-shotting them. So you got to be a little bit careful with that. You can see them, of course, and interrupt them. So you want to make sure you use those AoE stuns and those interrupts as much as possible. Now we do see them engage the boss, which does have a little bit of a RP going on. So they have to wait until the boss is actually attackable. And once they dealt with the boss, they're going to go back, kill the other Dreadlopelk, and make sure they proc their Reaping.
Yeah, so Lord Stormsong, something to note, he does have a Void Bolt cast that you're actually able to Spell Reflect back as a Prot Warrior. It makes Prot Warrior incredibly good on this fight, as it does end up doing about 20 to 25-ish% of his health over the course of the whole entire fight. He also ends up having an Ancient Mindbender cast, which you do see both of the rogues end up popping their... actually, JB ends up getting the Ancient Mindbender on him, and he doesn't end up being able to eat any of the balls, as he does get the Mindbender on him. Both of the rogues probably pop their cloak there in order to try to bait that Mindbender on them, because if you do get the Mindbender casting on you while you do have cloak available, the Mindbender just kind of goes away, and you don't end up losing any DPS. But as it did go on JB, the rogues used both of their cloaks, but they didn't lose any damage because it did, in fact, go on JB.
Yeah, they lost the 50-50 there, as you do not know who the ability is being cast on. Now you have 2 immune targets and 2 who can't immune. Unfortunately lost it, and JB got hit by this ability. But it's still better to have it on a healer than on Lighty, because of course, you know, you want as much damage as possible. The damage coming out from this boss should not be a big deal for them to survive, because you don't have really dangerous affixes on top of this boss fight. Is also not tyrannical. The only thing you have to watch out for is this Rip Mind cast that you can see being applied to random players. It will apply a debuff to you. It does initial damage, and then it slows you, so it needs to be dispelled, as we can see it on Shakib right now. But you know, it didn't drop him that low. It dropped into like 70% HP, so it's not a big deal.
Yeah, and on the side of 40K, we actually see them dealing with the Ritualist here after they did kill Brother Ironhole and Gale Collar Faye, while we do see on the side of Method NA, Lord Stormsong getting dangerously low here. And once you do kill Lord Stormsong, you get your first checkpoint of the instance here. So this is actually going to be great for them, because if they do end up wiping at some point, they will only spawn in this Lord Stormsong room, as opposed to having to spawn right back at the very beginning of the instance.
Okay, so JB getting the mind control while the boss died, so now they have to wait until it runs out, or they have to get him out. What you usually want to do if you get this last mind control is you want to jump into the water of the well in the back, because the well actually damages you. So sometimes if you get this last MC, you just jump in there. But they got him out of the mind control. Now they're pulling this last Dweller pack, which will proc their Reaping. Then they will have to make sure that they use their Shadow Melt correctly. Now one thing to keep in mind with Shadow Melt is you need the right time with it, right? You need to wait until you're actually in combat with the Reaping Wave and then Shadow Melt. If you Shadow Melt too early before you're in combat with them, you will actually, the Shadow Melt will actually not do anything. We see a lot of travel for 40K. He has still 13 deaths, a lot of travel on the trash coming in, but Method NA just having a pretty clean run so far. Of course, have those 4 deaths still because of this the mess up on the second boss, but now they're on their way to the last boss, and they're on their way to winning this shrine.
Yeah, Volzith, obviously one of the easier bosses. I think they have a lot of time to spare as well on Volzith. Obviously, the boss is going to be pretty scary for them, because he does put a debuff on JB that gives him increased damage, but it also gives him reduced health. If JB ends up taking any damage from any of the casts getting off, or getting hit by a tentacle or anything else, he will instantly die, and then end up having to, you'll end up having to reset Volzith, because the boss ends up, because you don't end up having a B-res on anybody else except for the Druid class in this composition that we do see on the side of Method NA.
Yeah, definitely pretty dangerous, especially if you don't have a battle rest, as you mentioned. So JB getting this buff on him will increase his damage by a lot, and you want to abuse this damage buff as much as possible. That's why we see teams engaging the boss fight first, then kind of waiting until the intermission phase is over and the boss just kind of stands there and does nothing, channeling a cast. Until he's interrupted, he just pretty much does nothing. So you want your team to deal with the rest of the trash while the healer has the damage buff to be more efficient on this fight as we see them engaging the boss, and we'll soon see the intermission phase start here.
Yeah, you actually can dispel that Whispers of Power debuff. Do you actually expect to see JB maybe looking to dispel it off of himself?
No.
I mean, it's a little bit risky here, but for him to have it, especially compared to like where Fourty is in the instance. And if he did end up going down, they would end up having to reset Volzith, and it would actually be pretty bad for them.
Well, so the one reason I think they're not going to dispel it is because they want to one-phase the boss. They do have their Bloodlust ready, and if they don't have JB's buff, they will not be able to one-phase it. If they do get an extra intermission phase, that just adds extra difficulty. I don't think it's actually that much safer to have an extra intermission phase because there's more things that can go wrong. As we can see them doing the intermission phase right now, the 3 DPS will get sent into one realm while the healer and the tank get sent into another.
Yeah, we actually did see Yoda pop his cheat death there on accident. I don't know exactly what happened. Maybe one of the Denizens cast just went off while he was incredibly low, and he ended up proccing his cheat death. Overall, it's not going to end up doing too much. As you do see on the side of Method NA, they gear up to be pulling this double Denizen, double Forgotten Denizen, one Sunken Denizen pack. Making sure that you have to kick those Forgotten Denizens is very important, as if the cast does go off, it will heal both of the Forgotten, or it will heal one of the Forgotten Denizens to full, but more importantly, JB will die because it does an AoE on the whole entire group, and he does have reduced health because he does have that Whispers of Madness debuff.
Yeah, it definitely shouldn't be a problem here with this full melee lineup, having this shorter cooldown on interrupt. Now, one thing you have to note, of course, is the bursting. Now, bursting does percentage HP damage. So, even if JB has this debuff on him, which increases his max HP, the bursting will not do the same damage to JB as the bursting will do to Nerf Clap, for example. So it's totally safe for them to have it on him, as long as it's not too many stacks, of course. Now, one thing to note as well is that these eels are very dangerous mobs because not only do you have Necrotic, but they also apply a stacking bleed debuff.
And you actually see JB mass rooting all the eels there for a second after that Ring of Peace did end up going down. It would obviously be a little bit better if he did have Typhoon there, but you do see Nerf get a reset of Necrotic there while he does pull those eels, so that's actually very good. On the side of Fourty, we actually do see them getting their 4-3 for the instance, kind of failing that Shadow Meld, and they ended up getting a decent amount of that reaping. You do see Rentari and Lazzle going down there on the side of Fourty, while you do see Method NA here finishing up their last pack of eels before finishing off Volzith here in a second.
Yeah, one thing about this master, maybe it actually was intentional, because mastering those eels actually can help a little bit with the kiting. And one more thing to mention as well, this last boss in the normal phase, he will constantly cast those small ads that are spawning in at the side of the room that will trying to reach the boss. Now, you want us to see them somehow, or because if you kill them, they do AoE damage to the whole group, and if they reach the boss, he will get energy and he will cast his intermission phase faster. So maybe actually having this master, just making sure he can deal with those ads a little bit better, maybe it was intentional.
I think it's unlikely that it was intentional, but it is actually decent for this last phase. He actually ended up using it on the eel, so he doesn't even have it up yet. So it doesn't seem like it was intentional, but using the Ring of Peace and the Mass Entangling whenever it does come back up for Volzith, for you not to have to like frantically try to move the boss around the room to make sure the ads don't hit him is important. Because once the boss does absorb the ads, he will gain energy from each ad that does hit the boss and kind of do a pulsing AoE around him whenever the ads do hit the boss. But it does look like on the side of Method NA, they will be able to kill Volzith here in one phase, and then they end up having to just kill one Abyssal Eel, and then the instance will end. And that is Shrine of the Storm for Method NA. Overall, a very clean run here.
Method NA washing away Fourty here as they move on to the grand finals here for their rematch against Method EU here. Very strong performance throughout King's Rest and for Shrine of the Storm here, and it really looks like that they have the polish that they really need to go up against Method EU again.
Yeah, I mean, that Method NA run, there was a little bit of a hiccup on the second boss where they just barely extended a 7-stack bursting to an 8-stack, but fortunately Lighty was able to get out, stay alive, and res JB, so it didn't cause a complete catastrophic wipe where they would have had to go back through both of the reaping waves. But the real story of the dungeon here was just slop from Fourty. So many mistakes. They messed up those living current skip, costing them 3 deaths, and then they messed up also the notorious bridge skip later on in the dungeon, causing them to have to go back through all those reaping waves. So I mean, even though Method NA won the dungeon, it kind of just feels like Shrine won once again.
And right on display, we're able to see all the little areas where, you know, there's so many accidents that can happen on Shrine of the Storm, and in so many different areas as well. You know, we saw it on the bridge. We've seen it so